Congresswoman Katie Hill there defending 81 document requests going out to Trump associates and entities from Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee. Well, joining me right now, Congressman Jamie Raskin, Maryland Democrat, member of House Judiciary and Oversight Committees. Welcome back to the broadcast. It's good to see you, sir. I want to get your reaction right away to these requests. And are documents pouring in?
Yes, I'm delighted to be with you. Yeah, well, as Katie Hill was saying, there were 2 years where the Republicans did no constitutional oversight of the executive branch. And we have so many very serious allegations of abuse of power, obstruction of justice, cooperation with the Russian active measure campaign to interfere with the 2016 election, emoluments clause violations, and so on. And so we're catching up on lost time here. We sent those document requests out. I think they've got another week to get everything back in, but it shouldn't be difficult because every document we requested was one that's already been produced in another federal or state or congressional investigation.
Look, I have a nice summary of at least most of those different lawsuits already ongoing and the investigations. And to add to the ones you said, maybe repeat a couple: Russian interference, emoluments, you mentioned those, hush money, obstruction, foreign influence, WikiLeaks, the DNC hack. I mean, where do you start now? And can you get through all this before the next election cycle?
Well, I agree. It's a tough challenge confronting us. It's kind of like coming upon an 88-car pileup on the highway. Where do you begin? But we need to obviously get to the bottom of federal crimes that have taken place, ongoing patterns of corruption that are undermining the public interest. But we also need to tell a coherent narrative, and we need to find out exactly what happened. And, you know, we've got a president who is behaving as though the federal government is an instrument for money-making and self-enrichment, which is the exact opposite of the constitutional design. That's what the emoluments clause is.
Exactly.
It's just an anti-bribery clause, which says neither the president nor members of Congress can collect payments from foreign princes, kings, or governments. And yet every day at the Trump Hotel, at the office tower, at the golf clubs, they're raking in tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars from foreign governments, which have figured that this is a great way to flatter the president of the United States. And that's precisely what the founders didn't want us to do.
Well,
so we're going back to basic, we're going back to constitutional basics here.
But Congressman, with regard to the emoluments clause and the violations therein by the Trump administration, the fact is that this has been ongoing for some time. There have been lawsuits that have been filed some time ago, and look how long it's taking for them to percolate and to get put in front of a judge. I mean, what does that say about everything else?
Well, it says they've been packing the courts, too. Now, there have been some very brave judges who have been finding that Congress has standing, that the state of Maryland, the District of Columbia, have standing to object to the emoluments violations. But the Trump Hotel, I've got legislation I'm prepared to put in to change the name of the old post office building to the Washington Emolument, because every day they're just collecting bribes and payoffs from foreign governments, which think that this is a reasonable way to do business and to gain access to the White House and the executive branch of government. It's happening right under our eyes. So now, finally, we're getting some discovery, and we're going after it. And of course, the Republicans are kicking and screaming because they don't want us to do this. But, they would prefer if we were still working on the Benghazi investigation and Hillary's emails. They spent more than 2 years on that stuff, and they're complaining after 2 weeks of us just sending out document requests to try to get to the bottom of the corruption and lawlessness that are engulfing this administration.
Well, look, you say the Republicans aren't real keen about you doing this. Neither is the president. Let's take a listen to what he said about all of it.
81 people or organizations got letters. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace to our country. I'm not surprised it's happening. Basically, they've started the campaign. So the campaign begins.
That last point the president made, does he have a point? Is part of the objective here to keep the cloud of investigation simmering over the president well into the 2020 campaign?
No, we have a constitutional oversight responsibility to be ferreting out corruption in the executive branch. And this is the most corrupt presidency of our lifetimes. Nothing else even comes close to a president who's decided to make the government a money-making operation for himself and his friends, and then has sold off essentially every department of government to the private special interests who are supposed to be regulated by it. So the Department of Education is overrun by the for-profit colleges now. The Department of Interior has been taken over by the mining interests and by the fracking interests. And so you name a special interest which does not have the general good of the public in heart, those are the people that he's allowed to take over our government.
Is there any potential political fallout that you worry about for the Democrats if investigations do not uncover substantive proof of these allegations of malfeasance?
Well, first of all, there are already lots of people going to jail, as we've seen. The president's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort's going to jail. Michael Flynn, his national security advisor, went to jail despite the fact he'd been warned by the Obama administration that he was compromised by his ties to Russian oligarchs and Vladimir Putin. Of course, Michael Cohen, who lied for the president for more than 10 years and described that as his basic job qualification, he's going off to jail. So, there aren't too many people left there. Everything, is in plain sight. We need to put it together into a coherent narrative and explain how the government of the United States has been taken over by interests that are hostile to the best interest of the American people. And then, we have been making progress on the things we got elected to do. We just passed the expansion of the universal criminal and mental background check for gun purchases. So we're picking up people who were getting through the private gun show loophole, getting through the internet loophole, getting through, the parking lot at 7-Eleven loophole. We're making government work for the people again. We're working on prescription drug reform. We're working on health care. This is what we should be doing. And we've got to, stop the idea that government belongs to the president as if he's a king. It's a complete inversion of the constitutional design.
Congressman, one more question before I let you go, relative to the anti-hate legislation that you co-authored.
Yes.
The debate among Democrats over this appears to expose some deep divides. But give me the reality among Democrats in this division and what the consensus is on Congresswoman Omar. Is it rookie mistakes, what she was saying? Is it a generational divide, or is she just speaking her mind?
Well, there's a bunch of questions in there. They're all excellent questions. Look, we are a large majority coalition, and there are obviously some growing pains that go along with that. But I think we're doing beautifully. And the resolution that we adopted on Thursday is the most powerful denunciation of anti-Semitism in the history of the United States Congress. And it was the first denunciation of bigotry and bias against Muslims. And we denounced all of the forms of hate speech that threaten us. Now, when the Charlottesville events took place, we tried to get the Republicans in control of the House to have a resolution denouncing what had taken place, and they refused to do it. On the floor, I heard my colleague, Mr. Collins, say, oh, well, this is obvious, hate is hate. And then most of the Republicans did, thankfully, vote for it. But it wasn't so obvious that they wanted to do it after the murder of Heather Heyer in Charlottesville and the obscene demonstration of Nazi and neo-Confederate propaganda down there. There were still 23 Republicans who couldn't bring themselves to vote for it. And I think that history is going to judge them very harshly. There was an effort. I know they're saying, well, we wanted to just single out Representative Omar and not talk about the vile threats against her that took place in the wake of her comments imputing dual loyalty. But look, this is a big country, and we have to stand together. Like Ben Franklin said, we're going to hang together or we're going to hang separately. And so all of the groups who are threatened by the rising tide of anti-Semitism and racism and group hatred have got to stand together. And we did that very proudly. And I respect very much my colleague Ted Deutsch, who felt that he wanted to have a singular denunciation, but he still voted for what we did. He said he thought it was a great resolution, but he wanted to go further. Fine. There are a lot of people who wanted us to denounce Donald Trump, who ran the most anti-Semitic TV ad in American history, bar none, at the end of the 2016 campaign, targeting Lloyd Blankfein and Janet Yellen and George Soros. And as one of the authors, I said, if we do that, we're not going to be able to get the Republicans on board right now. Let's see if we can get everybody on board against anti-Semitism and racism, and we'll denounce individual people as we see fit later.
Well, given that you co-authored it, I very much appreciate that explanation and the interpretation and where things stand at this point. Very good.